but only in America can those kind of dreams come true. And sadly, Governor, I think that dream is slipping away. They're being taught a history of America that I don't even recognize. What's happening is the consequence of terrible policies. The excessive spending under the Biden administration. This is the American story. We get to the edge of the cliff and we pull ourselves back. We get to the edge of the cliff, and you and I lived through this.
The last chapter of America has not yet been written. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you, Governor.
This is an extraordinary book that really is a blueprint for how we would get our country back. But what I love is that your own story is a lot about how we get the country back. Because you grew up in a farm in western Pennsylvania. I doubt as a kid we got some Pennsylvania people here tonight, but I doubt you could have ever imagined that one day you would lead the largest hedge fund in the whole world. I mean, that's a pretty big trajectory.
Yeah, I feel like I have been blessed. I grew up in rural Pennsylvania and, grew up on the first Monday after Thanksgiving the school was off so you could go hunt deer. And I baled hay and trimmed Christmas trees and played sports, football and wrestling, and that got me into West Point. Wow. And West Point opened up the whole world to me. And one of the things you learn at West Point is duty, honor, country, and the responsibility to serve. And so who would have ever thought, but only in America, can those kind of dreams come true? And sadly, Governor, I think that dream is slipping away. And so this book is about the possibility, we're in peril, America's in decline, but we can renew ourselves if we educate our people, if we confront China, and we secure America. And that's what America's renewal is all about.
I'm always impressed if somebody gets in West Point. That's a big deal. I'm even more impressed if they make it all the way through, which you did, and then served your country in combat before going on to an incredibly, deservedly appreciation from this audience for your service. But then you get into the financial world. You work in the highest levels of the finance world. We're seeing some crazy things going on. 2 big banks failed just recently. What happened there?
Well, it's easy to focus on the Silicon Valley Bank, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but what's happening is the consequence of terrible policies. The excessive spending under the Biden administration, we had a 40% increase in discretionary spending. We have the highest debt levels in the history of America and the world. And that inflation is a consequence of that. And the Federal Reserve raised rates to stop that inflation, which kills all Americans, and that's put huge pressure on banks. And this was very predictable. But now what's happened is that this bank was terribly managed. The regulators missed what was obvious, but then the governments bailed out the depositors who were uninsured in the Silicon Valley Bank. And that set a terrible precedent because guess what? There's $8 trillion of uninsured deposits around America. And we've just set an expectation that, hey, those deposits are insured too. And that's a problem because that means people are going to invest their deposits in banks without thinking about risk. And anytime people aren't thinking about risk, we have big problems.
Well, we sure have some right now. Superpower in Peril is the title of the book. So we're the superpower, and obviously you think we are in peril. Let's talk about some of those perils. What is it that scares you most about this country and what's happened to us and where we are?
Well, when you look at it in the statistics, it jumps out. But when you're doing the campaign trail in Pennsylvania, like you did with me, you see it because you see the consequences of inflation and what it does to working families, what it does to people on a fixed income. You see what happens when the price of fuel goes through the roof. People can't fill up their car in ways that allows them to get back and forth to work. You see the fentanyl that you were just talking about, 5,000 deaths in Pennsylvania last year from fentanyl. It's killing these communities. You see it in the crime in places like Philadelphia. And you see the threat of China on the horizon. So the people I met on the campaign trail, they're angry. They think America is headed in the wrong direction. Here's the statistic that'll scare you most. 80% of Americans think the country's going in the wrong direction. 67% think that the American dream is no longer available for their kids. That's a crisis. And we've got to fix it. And that's what this book is all about.
You certainly talk about some of the problems we face in the country that we're in peril. Let's get into the heart of the book, which really is not just saying, oh, there's a problem. I mean, that would be an interesting read, and you certainly outlined that well. But the book is really more about how to solve these issues. And that's what I think people are hungry for. How do we fix this? So give us some clues. How do we fix this country?
Well, the book is, that title is, we're at a crossroads.
Yeah.
But the book, as you know, is optimistic. And if I could tell you, the reason I'm optimistic is because this is the American story. We get to the edge of the cliff and we pull ourselves back. We get to the edge of the cliff, and you and I lived through this in the 70s. 16% inflation. The economy was in recession. Gas through the roof. I remember odd days and even days.
Yeah.
I remember sitting with my dad in the gas station in the Country Squire. Does anybody remember the Country Squire? Right, the station wagon was like half a block long with wood on the sides. And we had Desert One, where we had this tragedy on the sands of Iran rescuing our hostages. 80% of Americans thought the country was headed in the wrong direction. And 4 years later, I was at West Point walking those beautiful walkways with the mountains around. America was back. It was morning in America. 4 years later, and that's because leadership makes a difference. So we need leadership today.
Boy, that's very well said. That is a hopeful reminder, because we sometimes think we'll never pull ourselves out of this. And when we start thinking back in history, there have been times when we were really in trouble, just like you've described in this book. But you also point out, as you say, that the last chapter of America has not yet been written.
Absolutely not. And there's many things in the book, but the thing I'll highlight, you asked for some specifics, is we got to educate our people. Now, what does that mean? Well, we all saw up close and personal during COVID the education that our children are getting. They're being taught a history of America that I don't even recognize. To apologize for America, that America was conceived in sin. There's a sexualization being taught in our elementary schools. That seems like madness to me. And teachers are playing a role in classrooms that they shouldn't. We see that now. We have to fix that. We have to give school choice. We've got to break the back.
Well, I think it is a phenomenal book. And boy, the timing for this book is right on schedule. We need this message so incredibly. By the way, one of your biggest fans is my daughter, Sarah, who absolutely adores you. She thinks you hung the moon, and I know she'll be excited. Well, I'm going to take her my copy of the book so she can...
It's mutual, Governor. And, the great line, which I know your whole life has been around this, is that as citizens, and William F. Buckley made this point, as citizens, we're privileged to live in the greatest country in the world, but we have a responsibility. And that's what this book is about. The responsibility of all of us, of our leaders, to step forward and make America great again.
Well, you've got a great personal story and a great story about America to tell in this. For our audience, I know you're going to want to head over to Huckabee.tv. We'll link you to get your own copy of Superpower in Peril. Hey, Mike Huckabee here. Listen, if you love your mom, apple pie, and being conservative, you know you ought to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and click the like button, and show all the leftists out there that conservatives are thriving and patriotism is far from dead. Am I pandering too much? No way. I'm just getting started.